On a warm June morning in 2020, FBI agents swarmed a peaceful property in rural Idaho. They were looking for 2 missing children, but deep down, everyone feared what they might find. As excavators dug into the dark soil of Chad Daybell's backyard, the worst possibilities became reality. The remains of 16-year-old Tylee Ryan and her 7-year-old brother, J.J. Vallow, were unearthed from makeshift graves. One body had been dismembered and burned. The other was wrapped in plastic and duct tape. These weren't just any missing kids. They were the children of Lori Vallow, Chad's new wife, the same woman who, months earlier, had been vacationing in Hawaii while refusing to tell anyone where her children were. This discovery would expose a twisted tale of doomsday prophecies, suspicious deaths, and a mother who believed her own children had become zombies. But to understand how 2 innocent kids ended up buried in their stepfather's yard, we need to go back to when a seemingly normal mom first crossed paths with a man who wrote books about the apocalypse. Early 2019 was when everything started to unravel. Lori Vallow was a suburban mom from Arizona, attractive, charismatic, and deeply religious. She taught at the local church and seemed, by all accounts, like a devoted mother to Tylee and JJ. But something changed when she attended a religious conference in Utah. That's where she met Chad Daybell. Chad wasn't your typical religious author. Sure, he wrote books about preparing for the end times, but his ideas went way beyond standard doomsday prepping. He claimed he could see beyond the veil, that he had died multiple times and come back with divine knowledge. And Lori? She was completely captivated. They started talking regularly, spending hours on the phone discussing their shared visions of the apocalypse. Chad told Lori she was a light being, one of God's chosen few. He said they had been married in multiple past lives. Meanwhile, his actual wife, Tammy, was still very much alive, and Lori was married to Charles Vallow. Their relationship intensified quickly. Lori began telling friends that she was chosen for a special mission. She said she could see light and dark spirits, that some people were actually zombies whose souls had left their bodies. Her husband, Charles, noticed the change. He told friends he was worried about her mental state and that she wasn't the same person anymore. What started as spiritual discussions soon turned darker. Lori and Chad believed they were warriors in a cosmic battle between good and evil. They thought the world would end in July 2020, and that it was their job to prepare the way. But preparation in their minds meant eliminating the darkness. And they got to decide who was dark and who was light. On July 11th, 2019, Charles Vallow arrived at Lori's home in Chandler, Arizona to pick up JJ for school. What happened next would set off a chain of events that no one could have predicted. According to police reports, Lori's brother Alex Cox shot Charles twice in the chest, claiming it was self-defense. Charles died at the scene. The investigation into Charles's death was surprisingly brief. Alex told police that Charles had attacked him with a baseball bat and he had no choice but to shoot. The cops bought the story, at least initially. But there was something they didn't know at the time. Just months earlier, Charles had filed for divorce from Lori, telling the court he feared for his life. He'd even taken out a protection order saying Lori had threatened to kill him. Then, 3 months after Charles's death, another tragedy struck. Tammy Daybell, Chad's wife of 29 years, was found dead in her bed. Chad told everyone she'd gone to sleep with a terrible cough and never woke up. No autopsy was performed. The death was ruled natural causes. 2 weeks later, just 2 weeks, Chad and Lori got married in Hawaii. The timing was suspicious, to say the least. But it wasn't until months later that investigators started connecting the dots. They learned that Chad had taken out a massive life insurance policy on Tammy shortly before her death. They discovered text messages between Chad and Lori discussing their bright future together, while both their spouses were still alive. And they found out about Charles's warnings about Lori, warnings that seemed eerily prophetic now. What looked like 2 separate tragedies started to look more like calculated steps in a larger plan, a plan that would eventually lead to even more horrific discoveries. September 8th, 2019 started as a family trip to Yellowstone National Park. Photos from that day show 16-year-old Tylee Ryan smiling next to her little brother JJ, their mom Lori, and uncle Alex. It was the last time anyone would see Tylee alive. 2 weeks later, on September 23rd, JJ was recorded on a neighbor's Ring camera playing in the yard of their Rexburg, Idaho apartment. After that day, the happy, energetic 7-year-old simply vanished. When teachers at his elementary school called to check on his absences, Lori told them she was pulling him out to homeschool. She never filed the paperwork. For weeks, nobody outside the family's immediate circle realized the kids were missing. Lori had an excuse for everyone. She told Chad's adult children that Tylee was busy at college. She told JJ's grandparents he was staying with friends in Arizona. She even kept collecting JJ's Social Security benefits for his disabilities, acting like everything was normal. But Kay Woodcock, JJ's grandmother, knew something wasn't right. She couldn't get Lori to answer calls or texts. The few times she did get through, Lori's stories didn't add up. Finally, in late November, Kay called the Rexburg police and begged them to check on JJ. When officers showed up at Lori's apartment, she told them JJ was staying with her friend Melanie Gibb in Arizona. But when police contacted Melanie, she admitted Lori had asked her to lie and say JJ was with her. JJ hadn't been there at all, and no one could account for Tylee either. By the time police returned with a search warrant the next day, Lori and Chad had fled town. They'd packed up and disappeared to Hawaii, leaving no trace of the children behind. As investigators would later discover, by the time anyone started looking for JJ and Tylee, both children were already dead, their bodies hidden on Chad's property in ways too horrific to imagine. The disappearance of 2 children set off alarm bells across multiple states, but Rexburg police quickly hit walls at every turn. Each person they interviewed seemed to have been fed a different story about where JJ and Tylee were. The web of lies was starting to unravel, but Lori and Chad were already one step ahead. The initial investigation revealed disturbing patterns. Lori had withdrawn large sums of money from the kids' accounts. She'd sold JJ's service dog. Their apartments were cleaned out, but investigators couldn't find any sign that the children had moved with them. No school records, no medical records, nothing. Meanwhile, Lori and Chad were living it up in Hawaii. They were spotted shopping, going to the beach, even getting smoothies, while concerned family members back in Idaho were desperate for answers. They didn't seem worried at all about their missing kids. When reporters caught up with them in a parking lot, they simply smiled and walked away without saying a word. Back in Rexburg, investigators were piecing together a timeline that made their blood run cold. They discovered that shortly after each child was last seen, Lori's brother, Alex Cox's cell phone had pinged for hours at Chad Daybell's property, the same property where Chad's wife Tammy had died under mysterious circumstances just weeks before Chad and Lori got married. The police weren't just dealing with missing children anymore. They were looking at what appeared to be a calculated plan. Text messages between Lori and Chad showed them discussing their belief that both kids had become zombies. Their religious writings talked about eliminating dark spirits. With each new piece of evidence, the case took an even darker turn. At the heart of this case was a bizarre set of religious beliefs that went way beyond typical Doomsday preparations. Lori and Chad had created their own twisted version of Mormon end times prophecies, convinced they were chosen warriors in a spiritual battle between good and evil. They believed they could identify people whose bodies had been taken over by dark spirits. These people weren't really people anymore. They called them zombies. And according to their warped beliefs, these zombies needed to be eliminated to save their souls. It wasn't murder in their minds. They thought they were doing God's work. Their writings and text messages showed how deep this delusion went. They had detailed scoring systems to rate people's light or dark levels. They claimed they could see people's true spirits. Chad would tell Lori which of her family members had become zombies, and Lori would believe every word. The couple thought they were part of the 144,000 chosen ones mentioned in the Bible's book of Revelation. They believed they were translated beings who couldn't die and that they had been married in multiple past lives. Chad claimed he could see through the veil and receive divine revelations about who needed to be removed. Most chilling of all, they taught that death was just a transition, that killing a zombie would free that person's soul. This belief system gave them the perfect justification for murder. Every death in their wake was wrapped in these religious delusions. They weren't just killing people. In their minds, they were carrying out a divine mission to rid the world of evil. On June 9th, 2020, the search that had gripped the nation for 9 months finally came to its heartbreaking conclusion. FBI agents and local police descended on Chad Daybell's property in Salem, Idaho. They knew exactly where to look, thanks to cell phone data from Alex Cox's phone, which had pinged in specific locations on the property back in September 2019. The first discovery came in the morning. Disturbed earth near a pet cemetery on the property, but what they found wasn't a family pet. It was the remains of 7-year-old JJ Vallow wrapped in plastic and duct tape. Hours later, in another part of the property, they found what was left of the 16-year-old Tylee Ryan. Her remains had been burned and dismembered. Chad Daybell watched the excavation from his car nearby. When investigators confirmed what they'd found, they moved in to arrest him. He tried to run but didn't get far. They caught him about a mile from his house, attempting to flee in his SUV. Meanwhile, Lori was already in custody in Madison County Jail. She'd been arrested months earlier in Hawaii for desertion of her children. But now, with the discovery of the bodies, everything changed. The charges against both of them escalated to conspiracy and first-degree murder. The evidence was damning. Not only did they have Alex Cox's cell phone data, but they also had text messages between Lori and Chad discussing their plans. They had witnesses who'd heard their zombie talk. They even had financial records showing Lori was still collecting Social Security benefits for JJ months after his death. Police had suspected the worst, but nothing could have prepared them for what they found buried in Chad's backyard. The peaceful rural property had been hiding the darkest of secrets, and now those secrets were finally coming to light. After months of legal proceedings, Lori Vallow-Daybell's trial began in January 2023 in Boise, Idaho. For 6 weeks, prosecutors laid out their case, revealing the horrifying details of how religious extremism and delusion led to the murders of 2 innocent children and Chad's first wife, Tammy. The evidence was overwhelming. But this story isn't over. Chad Daybell still awaits his day in court. The man who wrote books about the end times now faces his own judgment, charged with the same murders as his wife. His trial, whenever it happens, promises to reveal even more about this tragic case. What makes this case so haunting isn't just the murders, it's how belief and manipulation can twist people into doing unthinkable things. 2 kids and an innocent woman lost their lives because 2 people convinced themselves they were on some divine mission. And in the end, there's nothing divine about any of it, just evil dressed up as faith.